that he had done that Magnavox had licensed. And there was litigation going on where Magnavox had sued Activision for violating that video game patent. And about the same time, Activision lost that case. And Magnavox won a $7 million judgment. This was when Activision was trying to pull itself out of this huge disaster. And that $7 million judgment was pretty much the death of the company. And they became insolvent. Dave and I had both been gone, I guess, by then. And they went into a pseudo-bankruptcy. The current management team, Bobby Kotick, who's, I guess, still the CEO, swooped in, bought the entire thing for like $600,000, plus assuming all the problems. And he immediately turned around and issued, 100 bazillion shares of stock to Magnavox to take care of the $7 million judgment. And so all he really bought was the name. Forget the assets. I mean, I talked to people, they called me, there were 10 employees, and they would call me and say, do you have any source code? Because we don't have any source code. I mean, they had nothing. It was a new company. They basically bought the name, and they've done pretty well for themselves since then, but different company.
You've addressed the color rules and the sound rules. It's commonly believed there was a no flicker rule.
A no what rule?
No flicker.
Oh, God. Yeah, right, Dave? There was a no flicker rule. Yeah, we laughed a lot about Flickr. Flickr was a funny thing. Yet, the thing we took the greatest pride in, and the reason we loved the Atari machine, was writing those kernels. And the kernel was a 72 cycle loop that you wrote that drew the image on the screen. Every 72 cycles you drew one scan line. And the puzzle, the reason we loved it, was the puzzle was how much could you display on a single scan line on the TV, and the various ways you could figure out how to do it. And the cop-out was the flicker, because then you run one scan line on the odd TV frames, and one kernel on one frame, and another kernel on another frame, put up half the objects, and they would flicker because they're only displayed in every other frame. So there was an issue of pride, no, don't flicker. Figure out how to jam one more damn thing onto that kernel because you want it all to be on. And you didn't. I don't think we ever put a flicker game out, did we? Right? There's no flicker game. There's never a flicker game, no. I mean, I would have loved, intellectually, I would have loved to have tried to write Pac-Man. Because when we looked at Pac-Man from Atari, there was a lot of flickering. And we all said, boy, I think we could have done a better job. Now that's easy to say now. But intellectually, I would have liked to have tried. Because I think maybe you could have done the game without flicker, who knows? But yeah, no flicker rule, that's good.
Did you say earlier that you and Dave had your own company now? What are you up to?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Let me try again.
Good.
Did you say earlier that you and Dave now have a company together?
Yeah, Dave and I have...
What are you guys up to? What are you doing?
Well, Dave and I have pretty much worked continuously since I met Dave at Activision. I started the East Coast office for Activision in '82. That's when I met Dave. And we've pretty much worked continuously since then. I guess except for a 2-year hiatus when Dave worked for Hasbro on a top secret game project. Other than that, we worked together. What we're doing now is, in February of this year, we announced a digital publishing venture. We like the idea of selling games directly to consumers over the internet. So we have a digital publishing venture called AppStar, A-P-P-S-T-A-R, AppStar Games. And we do games on the iPhone, the iPad, the Nintendo DSi, which has downloadable games, Android, any platform where a consumer can download a game directly. And, they're the games we do. They're small games, they're fun games, compelling games, and we're not going to do Call of Duty. We're going to do the type of games we always do. So AppStar Games is our new company.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm really happy to say that.
Decision between Atari and Activision.
Yeah.
From where I'm sitting, that seems like a no-brainer.
No, it was a really hard decision.
Why?
I got to tell you the story. It was a really hard decision. So I had been working for a little tiny consulting company in New Jersey. I was as far away from the Silicon Valley mentality as you could get. And I'm this kid right out of school, and I'm working for this company, and we ended up, I ended up, backing into the toy industry, and I invented a toy that Parker Brothers marketed. Suddenly I went from the kid in the office that soldered circuit boards, suddenly I had respect, because all these people I worked with came up with all these toy inventions, and we had this meeting with Parker Brothers, and the head of Parker Brothers came in and sat down and went through all the toy inventions, and I'm this snot-nosed kid in the back room who solders boards, and I had an idea. And after they looked at all the ideas, they said, you know, we like that one that kid in the back has. And they ended up doing my thing, and it was Bank Shot. It's a handheld billiard game, and it did really well. Well, I then went to my boss and said, I think the wave of the future is video games. We should buy an Atari, we should bust it open, figure out how it works, and I'll write Atari games. And he said, you're nuts, go back in the office and solder boards. Well, I went and did it anyway. And I opened up an Atari and I back engineered it. So I'm all on the East Coast, and this is all going on the West Coast. So I figured out how to write Atari games, and they started to monetize my work at this company, so I left. So now I was freelance. And I got contacted by Coleco, because they found out I was outside of the Atari and Activision people. I was probably the only person in the world who could write an Atari game at that point. So I did Donkey Kong on the Atari machine for Coleco. And then I had a choice when I was facing Donkey Kong, what do I do? And I had a team of guys with me, and we were ready to set up shop. So I contacted Atari, and I said, look, I have a team of programmers, I did Donkey Kong. You know, I had like 2 or 3 games. Space Jockey was the first one I had done when I had back engineered. And Atari flew us out first class to Sunnyvale, put us up at the nicest hotel, you know, brought us in, wined and dined us, told us they were going to fill our bank accounts with money, and we were going to do all these games. They wanted us to port pole position to the 2600, I remember one. All these arcade games, make a fortune. We're going to be so rich. So a week later, Activision, we fly out and we see them. And we go into a room, we meet Al Miller and Dave. I think probably just the 2 of them. But we like their games so much better. And we actually like them so much better. These were legends. These are guys that we really respected. And they didn't offer us any huge piles of money. They said, we don't want you to be contractors. We'll just offer you a job. Open up our East Coast office, become a design office for us. And there was no promise of, you know, steamrolling money into our bank accounts. So I called my Atari guy and I said, look, I've thought about it a lot. We're opening up Activision's East Coast office. Thanks for the offer. The guy called me back an hour later. He was furious. He said, I'm flying to New Jersey. So he flew to New Jersey and he says, we have a meeting in New York City. And I don't know what's going on. I'm a kid. I don't know. So he picks me up, we go to New York City, we go to the Time Warner building, because Time Warner owned Atari. And we go to the Time Warner building, we go to the top floor of the Time Warner building, and he takes me into the office of Manny Gerard, who is now a huge investment banker, and at the time was head of the division of Time Warner that owned Atari. So he takes me right to the boss, drags me in there. I have no experience dealing with this stuff. Sits me down, and I swear to God, Manny Gerard's office is as big as this room. You know, I walk in, it's a table all the way at the end, and there he is. Sits down, and they look at me and go, all right, what's it going to take? What's it going to take to get you to do this for Atari? And I'm just, you know, and I got an open ticket right now. I can tell them, you know, $5 million we're going to do. You know, I can write my ticket. And I was a kid. And I said, look, I got to be honest with you. I said, I can't work for a company that put out that piece of shit Pac-Man. I told the people that like a year later, they said, what are you, an idiot? You could have made so much money. But, you know, I didn't regret it. I mean, working at Activision was the best, well, I would say I worked at Activision for 4 years, and the first 2.5 years was fabulous. The best 2.5 years I ever had. You know, then it hit the fan and things started to go south quick. But that Atari meeting, I still think about it, was hysterical. I was too dumb to know what you don't say to a guy of that size and stature. You don't say that. But that's what I felt. I mean, I wanted to work at a company make good games. They just weren't making good games.
Well, imagine when he went back to the guys he was putting together this group with and tells them this story. And, you know, how they look at him as he's nuts.
Well, actually, all of them thought I was exactly right, except for one guy.
Yeah, JVR.
Yeah. One guy looked at me and said, well, yeah, you fucking mind. Everybody, excuse my language. Everybody else said, yeah, quality, you know, great. And one guy just looked at me like I was crazy.
So we could sit back here and do crap like that and get paid better?
That was basically it. We bang these games out, 10 a year and make all that money. But look, frankly, Atari, I think within a couple of years ran into trouble, and probably half of what was promised wouldn't have been delivered anyway. But on the other hand, you can think about it and say maybe we could have raised the bar, doing it. Maybe we could have done better product. But you got to give respect to all these guys. We sit out here and we laugh about E.T., about the game, and we make jokes about the flickering and Pac-Man. But there is no disrespect to the guys that wrote those games. Because you're not making those decisions in a vacuum when you're writing those games. You've got some guy standing there and saying, you've got 5 weeks to do a game. Well, I don't care whether it's Dave or me or anybody else. Our games, those beautiful Activision games, took 5 or 6 months. So you give somebody 5 weeks to do a game, that's what you're going to end up with. So unfortunately, even if we had made the decision to do Atari, if they're going to give us ridiculous deadlines and impossible, problems to overcome. It's like people always ask me on the Donkey Kong, why didn't I put in all 4 levels of the arcade game? I get a lot of grief. The first 2 levels are great, why didn't you put in all 4? Well, that decision was out of my hands. It was a 4K ROM. And I went to Coleco Management and said, all right, I need to go to an 8K ROM and I'm going to duplicate the thing exactly. And they said, no. And I said, yeah, but we got to have all the levels. And they said, no, and the game's got to be done in 3 hours. So, what are you going to do? You do what you do and you deliver it. So you have people that are making business decisions. And they're not always the same as what you'd make creatively.
Now, there were other factors of going to Activision instead of Atari. I found out later. If you remember, the first games that we put out had a catalog, a game catalog that showed our 6 games. The back cover of the catalog were pictures of the 4 designers. That was us at age 27, 28, whatever we were. Found out later that these guys, there happened to be 4 of them, had taken little pieces of paper and drawn pictures of themselves and cut them out and glued them down
On one of those Activision
on the back of that so that they looked like, this is the 4 of us.
Right.
On the
We
Activision
idolized
catalog.
those.
This was before making that decision to go to Activision.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it was kind of a pre-sold condition anyway.
There was actually a great story about that Activision meeting. We went to the Activision meeting, and you would think we'd go out there and we'd get grilled on technology, or we'd get grilled on game design, and we'd get grilled on, so my brother, Dan, and I went to this meeting. We go into Activision's office, and we probably met a bit with Jim Levy or Tom Lopez who ran development, but then the big moment came in March the designers, and it's Dave and Al Miller. And I'm thinking, what are they going to ask? What are we sweating? And what they do is they copy the cartridge. And Al Miller pops in ice hockey. He goes, you want to play? So
This is the game he wrote.
Al Miller wrote ice hockey. He goes, hey, you want to play? So Dan is the better player of the 2 of us. So my brother Dan picks the joystick up and proceeds to kick the crap out of Al in the game that he wrote. And every time Dan scores a goal, Al's like this, what was that? How'd you do that? Because Dan had this technique, and Dan just completely whooped him at his own game, and then we got her. So, you had to earn respect. We can play the games better than you, and that was it.
Steve, how did you choose Activision?
How did I choose Activision?
Or Activision chose you?
Like I said earlier, I'd gone to school with David Crane, and we actually went to school to learn hardware engineering. And when Dave and the guys founded Activision, came a point where they needed to hire a new designer. And it's not like you could put an ad in the newspaper and say experienced video game designers needed. There were none. So Dave said, hey, I know this guy from school. We can hire him and I'll teach him to design games. And they said, well, what if he can't do it? And Dave said, oh, no problem, he'll do our soldering for us. I was pretty good with the soldering iron. Garry mentioned earlier about how Atari had flown all of the guys out first class for an interview. Remember back in the early days of Activision, I think it was when I released my first cartridge. Back then we designed the game, we wrote the code, we did the graphics, we did the sound, we wrote the manual, we designed the box, and we actually went on press tours to promote the game. And the two biggest press tours of the year were CES. This is way before E3 events. So we go to CES, and since there were only 5 of us at the time doing games, you know, the entire company's future was wrapped up in the 5 of us. So they would actually fly us on separate planes in case the plane went down. They didn't want to lose the whole company. I remember back in the 70s, planes, you know, often fell out of the sky. It wasn't. So, how about any more? How about some more questions? Yes.
You mentioned the information sharing and sharing rising to each other's level. One of the stories that really struck me when I think this class came here, so 2005, is the story about Carol Shaw was looking at River Raid, and she needed a siren or something to represent when the player was running out of fuel, and one of the other people came over and did that. Do you have any other examples of that?
Well, that story was, yes.
Yeah, the question was you know, about code sharing. How if one person did a successful routine, since the code was so hard to write back then, we'd often share the code between us.
Like you.
Actually, well, my first game, Barnstorming.
Half of everybody's games was your code.
My first game, Barnstorming, Dave had, one of the programming techniques that Activision was being sued for was called the Venetian blind technique. And Dave had done this funny little demo on the screen where he had Venetian blinds opening and closing. And when you opened the Venetian blinds, there was this beautiful sunset behind the window. And Dave kept saying, I want to figure out a game where I can actually put a sunset in the game. And I saw that, and I was barnstorming, and instead of a blue sky, I'm going to put a sunset in the game. How did you do that? So I had to get the code for the sunset from Dave.
Well, the Carol Shaw story, for anybody who wasn't there in 2005, was kind of funny because River Raid, you're flying along, you're getting down to where your fuel is low, and you want to have a sound effect that says, you know, you better pick up one of those fuel depots for fuel. And so she was asking, you know, does anybody have any ideas on how to do that? And I'm sitting at the other end of the room. And Mike Lorenzen is the best person to tell this story because he was sitting there listening to it. And I gave her the code from memory. I told her the instructions to use. And she was typing as I was speaking. And she turned it on and it goes, and Mike Lorenzen was like, you know, this is just, he's just saying this stuff.
Right, and then somebody turned around to you and said, how did you do that? Because somebody asked me this morning, someone stopped and asked me this morning and said, when you did sound effects on the Atari 2600, what audio tool did you use? I mean, how did you, you know? And there was no audio tool, it was an algorithm. I mean, I told the person we were talking about it, that the jump sound for Mario in the Donkey Kong game, I had to make as close as I could to the one in the arcade game. There was no sampling it. So I wrote that algorithm as a bang, you know, and for weeks I kept going back and changing it, tweaking it, just trying to make it just perfect. Just this perfect little sound. It was all code. So I mean that's you just wrote this little loop, massage the register.
But just to be clear, code did not get reused verbatim, ever. You know, these days you have a routine that's
I think she thinks code was reused.
I'm really happy about it. You know, a routine that exists, a library, whatever, and you can plug it up and you drop it in, and it can work in this game the same way it worked in that game. You know, these were 2K and then 14-byte games, so 4,096 microprocessor bytes, you know, 2 bytes per instruction roughly. And every time you needed it, if it needed to be any different at all, which of course it did because it was a different game, you almost were better off rewriting it from scratch, because if you try to take something that was general purpose, it would take too many bytes. And maybe you drop it in as general purpose, then you go back later and have to take bytes out of it. We were always doing that. We were writing a 4K game, we typically wrote 5 or 6K, and then we went back and said, all right, how do we do the exact same thing in 2/3 of the amount of ROM? And eventually figured out how to do it each time.
Yeah, Keystone Capers was a was 6K when it was fully playing, and we cut 2K out of it. And that was like, that's like sitting in the dentist chair for 2 months. I mean, that was one bite at a time. Horrible, but I mean, that's what you had to do.
You rewrite a routine 7 times. The 7th time is 1 bite smaller.
You go, all right. Save the bite. And then I remember on Keystone Capers, literally got it down to exactly, not one extra bite in the entire ROM, exactly the number of bites. And that had been brutal because I was over by 2K. And it went into manufacturing. And Dave calls me up a month later and says, there's a problem. He says, the problem is that we use this tester on the manufacturing line to test the ROMs or something. And some little devious 6502 trick I had done, to save 1 bite, I had done something that was screwing up the tester. So he said, you can't do that. It was creating a bit instruction that was hitting some out-of-bounds register and was causing a problem. Not in the actual game, but in the tester. So he said, you really have to do that. And I said, well, to do that, it means I got to find a bite. Because I can't do that trick anymore. And the way that, it's complicated, but the way it was you couldn't find a bite anywhere. You had to find a bite right in that area of the code. So you had maybe an 8.5 by 11 printout page, and within those 60 lines, I had to find a bite. And this is code that I had reduced by 50%. And yeah, it's just there's this rule that you can always find another bite. I think in about 5 minutes, I found another bite, and I was shocked. I was yeah, there's one. Why didn't I see that for 2 months? I was trying to find. But you can always find another. I actually miss that. See, these days you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to do it. Now you just, game industry gets sloppy, just make things big, it doesn't matter.
We would have a graphics table. And we realized that we could change the shape of the graphics a little bit and use the first byte of the graphics table as the last byte of an instruction.
So what if the guy looks a little different, right?
And we change it to look, it looks almost the same, and I say,
Lunacy. Questions?
Activision had like 50 hours of expanded games. Are there any like hidden treasures there, like
Any hidden treasures in Activision games or hidden games that never came out?
no, just like the ones that weren't as popular and maybe should have deserved more respect?
Well, I mean, it's hard. The ones that came out near the end, when the industry was dying, didn't get the success they deserved. Pitfall 2 was, I think, a better game than Pitfall 1, even though Pitfall 1 was incredible. But Pitfall 2 didn't have the same financial success because the industry had been tanking by then. Any come to mind?
well, Buffalo Steve's actually suffered that way. Somebody I was talking to last night said that Frostbite was one of his favorite games ever, but not a lot of people even got to see Frostbite because of the time it came out.
Right, another one was one I worked on. I didn't design it, but I was very involved, was Hero. Came out of my office on the East Coast, John Van Ryzen, and I spent a lot of time working on the design with him. And I think that is probably one of the best, deepest games ever done on the Atari 2600, but it came out too late. Had that come out during the heyday, I think that game would have done millions of units. Really incredibly deep, fun game. Mr. Woida. John worked with me for a long time, and Dave at Skyworks, our previous company, we were doing online games. He was involved. Then he left that, and he's done a little bit on the iPhone, but I think he has a real job now. God forbid, I mean, that's like our worst nightmare, to have to get a real job. But he has a real job. He's working for some engineering company or something. What's that? No, we don't. We were employees. We don't have the rights. They stay with the company. So, no. Or else you'd be seeing Pitfall on the iPhone any day now. No, we don't have the rights.
Like David Crane's Amazing Tennis, I still have the top part.
Right. Right. Yeah, top part. You got any rights on anything, Steve?
Garry was mentioning when Pitfall 2 came out. And I always tell a story. Dave actually doesn't remember this. Maybe he doesn't remember it the way I do. But back then we always prided ourselves on doing something new and different, something that had never been done before. Because that was our job as designers, to think of stuff that nobody had ever thought of before. And I had finished, I don't know whether it was, maybe I'd finished Sequest. And I'd sat around the lab for 2 or 3 weeks, toying around different game ideas, and just couldn't come up with anything interesting. And I said, hey Dave, I got an idea. Why don't we do Pitfall 2? And he said, what? I go, yeah, well, we'll do a sequel, like the movies. And Dave said, you can't do a sequel to a video game. I said, well, who'd want to buy that? I said, yeah, here, let me mock something up. So I got something on the screen, and I had him going vertically through these caverns instead of horizontally. And Dave looked at it and said, hey, maybe that would make a good game. And that was, I believe that was actually the world's first video game sequel. And so you can blame me for all that stuff out there now. More questions? Yes.
Was there any particular product or company that impressed you as designers?
Is there any products or companies that impressed us? Back then or now?
Yeah.
Back then?
Yes.
Back then.
You know, I remember being so wrapped up into what I was doing. I mean, this was, we lived and breathed and woke up in the morning and all we were thinking about was our code. We were so wrapped up in what we were doing that that's all we thought about. And, you know, I remember that we'd go to CES twice a year and walk around and see what all the other companies were doing. And I remember one CES in particular, I think it was 83, 84, something like that. And the world had gone from 2 or 3 companies making video games to 50. Now, all of a sudden, everybody in the world was making video games. In fact, Quaker Oats had a video game booth. And we looked around all the games and they were all so bad. And we thought, all this stuff is so bad that all these companies are going to be out of business in 6 months. And what we didn't realize is when they all went out of business, they would dump their inventory on the market, and all of a sudden, games that used to cost $25 are now 5 for $1 at Toys R Us. And that pretty much started the crash of the video game business.
I have to make a sub-comment about the Quaker Oats comment. When I did that back engineering and I created for this little engineering company in New Jersey the technology to do 2600 games, the first game I did, because while I was doing the back engineering, I had to be doing something. So I made a game that was like Defender that became Space Jockey, which was a simple 2K little space game. Well, that engineering company that I left then went on, put a couple of more games out that all had Space Jockey as the base technology, and sold the entire thing to Quaker Oats. So Quaker Oats got the game industry by buying my technology that I had created for that company. I take it your question is about in the game industry, because I loved what Apple was doing back there. I mean, everything I did was influenced by Apple. The way I back engineered the Atari 2600 was I was an Apple II guru. I had one of the very earliest machines, and it was a 6502 machine. And fortuitous to me, the Atari 2600 was also a 6502 machine. So the reason I could back engineer the 2600 was because I knew 6502 assembly language from writing Apple stuff. So I was very impressed by what Apple was doing. I mean, as far as in the game industry, I was impressed by what these guys were doing. That's why I joined the company. Outside of what these guys were doing, I didn't pay attention to much else. I mean, these guys were the king of the hill, and you know, I got involved with them.
Well, Imagic certainly brought out some well-designed, well-tweaked games.
It's a good point. Forgot about them.
I mean, that's the kind of thing that we would look at. Is we expected a game to be fun. You know, it's pretty. It's nice if it's pretty, but it really should play really well. And Rob Fulop, for one, and the other guys at Imagic.
Bob Smith.
Bob Smith certainly did a great job of hammering on it and tweaking it. They actually had a similar design philosophy to Activision. People working closely together, helping
great game. Yeah, that's a good point.
Was there any effort to get Rob Fulop to work with you guys?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm sure he was an equity holder in Imagic, and they haven't planned to go public or get sold, so I don't think so.
What really happened is there were 4 of us at Atari that, we worked together, we lunched together, it was a small group, a gang of 4. And we started Activision because we worked together anyway. We were going to work together here or work together there. And we had actually trained Rob and a number of the other guys, and they were the most senior guys left when we left Atari. And they kind of waited around and saw Activision was having a lot of success, and they said, hey, wait a minute. So they took the next most senior group, and they went off to form Imagic. So before we were ready to start hiring, they were already tied up in their new venture. The main issue with hiring for video game design was we had a fabulous group synergy in our lab. We had 4 guys who, for whatever reason, we could get in each other's heads, we could kibitz, we could complain and whine and wheedle and not piss the other guys off. I mean, everybody really worked together pretty well. And it bootstrapped the games to get better and better and better. So Levy comes back to our lab and says, this is really great. We're doing great. Activision did $60 million of revenue with 60 employees in 1 year. And he said, this is great, but it's killing us. We're all working too hard. We need to add some more people. So he said, if we add somebody into this group, we're going to destroy the group dynamics. That was our biggest fear. And that's where Steve Cartwright came in. Steve and I had never worked together, although we were actually professional foosball partners at one time. You didn't mention that. And what we were looking for was, how do we find somebody who will work well in the group? I don't care if they can design games, I don't care if they can write code. If they work well in the group, then that's going to work for us. And in fact, Steve had never written a line of assembly language before in his entire life. He had never designed a game before in his life. However, when he came in to interview, he came in with 4 or 5 game designs. And what he had done is he had looked at the games that we had already put out, and he said, that skiing game? If you turn it on its side and make it a canoe on a river, you have a river rafting game. He basically was ripping off the ideas, but what it was showing us is a way to think toward game design, a way to take a game mechanic that plays and turn it into another game. But he was hired because he and I got along, and I could be pretty certain that he was going to be able to work well in the group. The only other way to do that was to use a group that was not in our group. And Garry comes waltzing in. And Garry says, I've got 4 or 5 guys that I work with, and we work well together, and we understand this group synergy. And we said, that's absolutely great. Levy wants us to hire more people. We can hire those guys and leave them out on the East Coast. We never have to deal with them.
3,000 miles away. That's a problem.
And that's exactly what we did. It became what Activision called the Design Center philosophy. We opened a Design Center in New Jersey, we opened one in Boston, we opened one in Pasadena, somewhere else. Sacramento? Well, then the business went away and we started closing them. But in each case, we found 4 or 5 guys who worked well together, who had the technical skills. Between them, somewhere in that group, were all the technical skills that were needed. And at least one creative leader. And put those people in a room and said, you guys go to it. And it doesn't mess up our group synergy or Garry's group synergy that had been developed.
Tell an Activision game just by looking at it, even ignoring the fact that it had the logo on the bottom. They had a look. And how did we keep that consistency given the fact that we were as far away from Dave as we possibly could be without being in Australia. And he liked it that way. You know, we traded code all the time back and forth. We would see things they were working on. They'd see things we were working on. And there was a conscious effort to emulate what had worked in the past. So it was, you had to go off and do your own thing, but it wasn't go off and do your own thing at the expense of what we talked about earlier, of the quality of the brand. So clearly when Dave did something innovative, or I did something innovative, it permeated throughout the organization. It didn't matter what coast it was on. You know, we kept that level of quality as high as we could.
Gary's guys put the rainbow on the logo at the bottom of the screen.
Right, when we came, there was no rainbow. And I, one night, said, you know what? I said, I'm gonna put a logo, I'm gonna put a rainbow on there. I'm gonna emulate the box. And this was our little friendly competition that Dave and I have always had. It was actually more fierce competition back then. Is I put up a rainbow down there. Well, and I sent it, you know, I was a young upstart, and I sent it to the West Coast. And when you sent something to the West Coast for them to look at it, you never knew if they were going to come back and, rip you a new one or say, hey, nice work, because I mean, it was competition. So Dave looks at it, and he says, he didn't say anything, but he sends it back, and what he did is he slanted the logo to match the slant on the A. Where the logo the rainbow, where I had put the rainbow, it had just been a nice square rainbow, but it sat next to the A. He improved it by slanting it against the A, which looked great. But once again, he outdid me, and this is, part of our ongoing competition. But that's how the rainbow got applied. Yeah, I'm trying to think of it. I think we shipped big, giant PDP-11 that were like this big. I think that's what we did. I have memories in the mid-'80s of using like 400 baud modems and sending, a 2K file that took 2 weeks to get there. But I think it was the other thing. I think it was the big disc.
The PDP-11 had disc platters that were about 15 inches in diameter.
Yeah.
And plastic containers that you would drop in there. That was the floppy disk of the day.
I remember a quick PDP-11 story. I remember how funny this was. I had made my own development system when I back engineered the Atari, and I used an Apple II as the basis. And I had an assembler and the Apple and an editor and all that stuff, and I was very happy with it. Joined Activision, they said, oh, you can't use that anymore. You gotta use our tools. We have a PDP-11. And I was like, geez, PDP-11 is like, like NASA. So they roll in this giant machine into our office and set this thing up, and there's, guys coming in from deck and setting it up and managing it, and I'm so damn impressed. And then I go to assemble my code, and it takes about 15 minutes to assemble something that assembled in 30 seconds on the Apple II. And I'm like, why the hell is it so slow? Well, it was slow. The Apple II was so much faster than the PDP-11. It shocked me, but, I had to put up with it, because it was what it was, but I was better off on the Apple II. All right, are we done? Finishing up? One more?
I'm just curious when the original four left, what was the reaction from Atari Management? Did they kind of laugh and they go good luck, or were they worried?
I can't answer that one.
Well, Atari tried to sue the pants off of us, is what they tried to do. And in fact, we knew that would be coming. It always happens when someone splits off from a company and tries to start a new company. And we actually had a $40,000 legal budget in our original venture capital funding, so we knew we were going to take good care of that. And the first thing we did was reverse engineer the Atari 2600 so that we had our own manuals and that sort of thing, and I did all that work. So unfortunately, I was the one who got deposed the first time. And I'm sitting in a deposition that's lasting 7-8 hours. And by the 7th hour, because I'd been answering these questions, the guy finally just gave up, and he said, he would ask questions like, yeah, you didn't do this either, did you? I said, no. Because we did everything right. He finally was just asking leading questions so that he could get out of there, get all the questions done. We did nothing wrong. Atari bought a full-page ad in the magazine that came with this Consumer Electronics Show that first year. And it said something like, Atari, we condemn any company that would steal trade secrets from another company to try to do, they did all this thing. And then they come to another paragraph and they said, Activision has recently started doing business or whatever. You read this thing, and it was like the most, damning looking thing. But actually, as you read it, we all said, well, we agree with that. We agree with that. Anybody who steals trade secrets should be, punished or whatever. They had actually bought an entire one-page ad in that magazine to try to, interfere with our first year of business. But it didn't help.
And that case ultimately settled.
The case did ultimately settle, and often in a settlement, the terms of a settlement remain confidential. And Levy came to the four of us and said, the terms of the settlement are going to remain confidential. Do you even want to know? To a man, we just said, no, don't even tell us. We can't talk about it. I don't want to know. Whatever they did, they did.
All right, guys. I guess we're done. Thanks so much.